Well, we are getting into a brand new series today, and it's called The Christian Life of Community. And we are looking at how we are intricately connected to each other. At least we're designed to be intricately connected to each other. And we're gonna mess with our Sunday rhythms a little bit over the next couple weeks, and we'll share with you at the end what that is gonna look like, where we're gonna have some fun. And we're gonna push past our desire to stay independent from each other. And we're gonna see how this desire to be independent is very natural, and at the same time, it's unbiblical. So it's unnatural and it's unbiblical. The desire to have control or autonomy over our lives is something that we do in almost every phase of our lives. So how many of you like to work from home? Hands up. You like the ability to work from home. How many of you are like, nah, I don't like working from home? Yeah, 4. Okay, yeah. Everybody, almost everybody likes to work from home, and there's good reason for that. We get to control who we see and who we don't see. How many have a person in their workspace that they're like, if I could just navigate and I don't have to see that person any day, it would be a good day? Don't put your hand up. Okay, good. But you know that, right? You control who is close to you and who is going to speak to you, and you're like, no, if I don't have to see them, that means I get to work from home. You control when you start and when you finish. You're like, I started at 6:25 today, so I'm gonna be done at 2:25 today. And we like that kind of autonomy. Or if there's something you have to jump in and like, yeah, I have to pick up the kids from school or have to be there for this delivery. So we have that kind of control, and you get to control what you wear, and you get to control the heat or the cooling, and it's all very, very wonderful, except that if you wanna grow as a person, do you need easy, controlled interactions or tough, difficult interactions? You don't wanna answer that one, do you? We grow through our difficult interactions, or when we're challenged by people that maybe don't think exactly the way that we do. And what about if you wanna work as a team? Is it really easy to do that working from home? Some of you would say, oh yes, we work very efficiently as a home. And then every consultant would come in and say, this team is not working efficiently from home. And you have to be available at different times and different people, or you have to be available at different times to collaborate. And when we work from home, we meet our personal needs, but sometimes it leaves us in a very independent state, and we're not able to function and design and work the way that we were designed to do. There's benefits for sure, but there's also some challenges. What about with your communication style? We have moved as a society to almost predominantly we do online communication, whether it's through text or emails or we leave comments. We like online communication versus in-person communication. I love to text because, you know what, I feel like I can do two things at once. You know, like you go, I have to get a message to somebody. I don't want to pick up the phone and interrupt what I'm doing, so I just send them a quick text. I also love texting because, you know, you type that out and you're like, oh, that sounds mean. I better back. And then I'm gonna change that word, and then you can change what you're going to say after you've already said it. And also, it can give you some emotional distance from another person when you're doing online communication. And that's all wonderful, except that communication is supposed to give your focused attention back and forth between two people. It's supposed to be verbal and nonverbal. It's supposed to include emotion. And we're supposed to learn that the things that we might just blurt out, we have to learn how those things land and how they affect another person. So you see, we have a desire for individualized control over our own worlds, and yet that's not the way that life was designed for us. And in the next 3 weeks, we're gonna look at how there's a struggle in all of us between how much control, how much independence can we have, and how much we should rely on other people. Now, we're gonna continue in our study of 1 Samuel, and I was talking to Chris last night. Chris was saying, you guys have been giving us this devotional reading. We're way ahead of you. Come on, church, catch up. You're only on like chapter 6. And so we're gonna zoom ahead a little bit here. If we were to do just an exegetical study on 1 and 2 Samuel, it would be like an entire year's study. So we're picking and choosing. And so we looked at the life of Samuel, and we just kind of tipped our toe into Saul's life. But we're gonna zoom forward into the life of David. Now, I hope you read all of the books because it gives you, there's so much there, and it gives you context for all the conversations we're having. Or we're going to do Samuel, not Saul. We're going to do David and then not his kids. But there's so many fascinating stories in this reading about their family and their friendships and their relationships. But today we're zooming up to chapter 18, and we're specifically looking at verses 1 to 4. And Israel had appointed Saul to be king, and Saul starts out as this fine king. He's prophesying like we looked at last week after he heard the voice of God and God began to change him. He begins to speak on behalf of God. But he doesn't carry out the leadership as God had instructed. And there's a key moment where he gets impatient and he begins to make decisions outside of God's timeline. And we were even praying into this as an eldership group this week, saying, Lord, if you have timelines, we need to ensure that we are moving on your timeline, because Saul was not. And this is part of the reason why Saul is rejected. So God dismisses Saul's leadership, and then he asks Samuel to go and anoint somebody from the house of Jesse. And many of us would know the famous stories of David being the last born of Jesse and not even there when Samuel's there to choose whom the next king would be. And then David has to come in and he's anointed. And then David, of course, goes and kills Goliath. We're not going to jump into some of those stories in our study. But we are going to spend 3 weeks looking at David and his interconnectedness. And we're going to challenge ourselves to maybe think and worship and live a little bit differently based on how David lived out his life. So we got 3 thoughts for you and then a reflection time. If you're looking for these notes and reflections, you got to download the Portico app, and all of the notes are there. Click on sermon notes, click on the sermon series, and you'll be able to find it. But let's jump into this text and first reflect on how God designed us for deep relationships. And I think as you heard in the baptismal testimonies today, it's in relationship that we begin to see the fullness of who we are expressed. And most of our psychological research and studies right now are saying, as much as we love working from home, and the majority of us put our hand up, and as much as we like online communication, because we have the appearance of being connected and we have the appearance of being efficient, the studies are coming back saying we're just not as efficient. We're driving less, we're out less, but we're not connected and we're not efficient. In fact, in this last week, many of you would know it's Monday, the third Monday of January is called Blue Monday. And they call it Blue Monday because winter is just a horrible season of life. I don't know if you agree with me on that. Yeah, yes, winter's just terrible. And so there's no sun in this country at this time. You get like 3 hours of sun every 2 weeks or something. It's freezing cold. All of the bills from your holidays come in, and it's Monday. And they call it the most depressing day of the year. And so Bell Let's Talk Day is always on the week of Blue Monday. And there's always a focus on mental health. And I was listening to this one report, and they said there is more reported mental health struggles than we've ever had before. And at the very same time, there are more supports and more attention on people's mental wellness than we've ever had before. So what's the problem? And the wrong conclusion that some people jump to is saying, well, because we're talking about it, it's just making everybody unwell. It fails to look at the way we've shifted all of our society to become very controlled and independent. And if you want to see where the sharp decline in people's mental well-being goes, you track it right back to the invention of this bad boy, the smartphone, and online work and online communication and online relationships. And you can see a sharp, drastic drop in people's mental well-being. And it's a wonderful tool that I even have up here so that I can speak from and I can read my Bible from. And we use them, but it's also had negative consequence in our life. So we're going to look at the life of David, a man who had God's heart, or was after God's heart. He's in the palace with a king and a leader who will grow to hate him. And he knew that this was not a safe place for him. His life was threatened in this palace. Part of David's role was to play music for King Saul when he was having some of his rage, when he was having some of his terrors, and he said, I just need that David to come and play some music for me. And David had every reason to not want to be in the palace because he was eventually going to be king, and everyone at this point would have known he was going to be king. Then he had Saul, the angry king, who was going to go after his life. This was not a safe place for David, and he had no good reason to be there other than relational connection. Let's look at 1 Samuel 18, chapter 1. So David is welcomed into the palace. He's defeated Goliath. He's going to come in. And after David finishes talking with Saul, he meets Jonathan, the king's son. And the scripture says there was an immediate bond between them, for Jonathan loved David. And we don't get the full context of what's going on, but there's a spiritual, deep connection that these two men have right away. Now some have asserted, again, incorrectly, that is this an example of where we see, this is just same-sex attraction that's affirmed in the Bible. It's David and Jonathan. If you know the scriptures, you'll know the real story. David's problem was that he was deeply attracted to the opposite sex that got him into a lot of trouble over the course of his life. Jonathan is also a father. This is the wrong reading of the text. This is not what we're talking about. We are talking about two men that went, my spirit is united with you, and I am going to do every bit of my life with you, even though my physical safety may be at risk. We're going to connect our lives to each other. There's something that they understand about each other, and their spirits just bonded. You know, if you go right back to the beginning of the Bible, you go to page 2, Genesis chapter 2, we're getting the story of how we were connected and the relational connection between God and us. This is the second creation account. And Genesis 2 says, it's not good for man to be alone, so I'm going to make a helper who is just right for him. Now, we have an understanding that, is this about marriage, and what is this about? But don't limit your understanding to that. So God creates humanity and says, no, it's not good that there's an individual. These individuals need to be connected to each other. And I'll create a helper, and that word is azer. And we talked a little bit about that if you were at our Grow Nights on Thursday night when we were looking at, are there different roles for men and women, and what is that? And this word azer is not, it's Adam's little helper. This word azer is the same word when you know in the Psalms where David says, where does my help come from? I look to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from my Father. It's that word azer, the word describing God, my salvation, my completion. This is what the word is. It's not good for man to be alone. I'm going to bring someone that completes him. And so Adam is cut in half, or the side of Adam is cut off. And then God creates Adam and Eve, and they walk in partnership as two people dependent on each other, dependent on God, with the task of caring for creation. Now, there is the procreation part in this story that goes, yes, we need each other to procreate, to care for the world, but there's also this understanding that God designed us to be deeply connected to each other. And he said, we're gonna create humanity in our image. Remember, if you go back to Genesis chapter 1, let's make mankind to be in our image. Well, what is the image of God? Let's go to John 17 and 21. This is the prayer of Jesus, where Jesus is praying, and he's praying to the Father in the Spirit. And he says, I pray that they will all be one just as you and I are one, as you are in me, Father, and I am in you, so that they may be in us. The relationship of God, the Father, Son, and Spirit is a relationship, is multiples come together as one. We were created in that image. And when we look deep inside our spirits, we're not designed to be independent. And when we are leaning into the design of, I want control, I want say over every part of my life, what we're actually doing is pushing the design of God out of our lives. So as an action step, we're all gonna throw our cell phones into, no, we're not gonna do that. Don't. But it should make us think. How are we designed? We're designed for deep bonded relationship with each other. And David and Jonathan in that moment, there was an immediate bond. How does that bond happen? When you listen to your spirit and you recognize the Father, Son, and Spirit are one, and we are built that same way. And deep relationships, this is our second point, they should impact the way that we live our lives. Let's not fight for that kind of independence to say, I don't want anybody else in my life, or I don't want anybody else in this close circle. We need deep bonds. Now, it's not ignoring that we have a desire to be independent. It's acknowledging that that desire is actually leaning away from how God formed us. It's not biblical for us ever to say, because I desire it, it's good, and because I don't desire it, it's not good. What's biblical is to go, Lord, how did you form me? And whether or not that's my desire, I'm going to lean into that. So watch what happens to David in verse 2, 1 Samuel 18:2. And we'll put it up. That from that day on, Saul, and it's gonna sound like Saul wanted David there. We're talking the house of Saul, and you've got to read the whole story. Saul didn't want David there. Saul threw spears at David. Saul chased David out. But the house of Saul wanted David there and would not let him leave. Jonathan and David, they made this connection. We said, you're staying here. We're walking through this life together. The context shows that these two young men said, we're gonna walk through life regardless of how challenging it may be. And we're gonna see that play out in the lives of these two over the next number of decades and as we do this study over the next few weeks. Because Saul knew at this point, God had already moved on and saying, I'm gonna raise up the next king. And Samuel had already anointed David. And this is key because you will have reasons why you don't connect deeply to other people. You say, I've been hurt. You will say, I need my space. You'll say, I just like to have control. I know what's best for me. Every time we do that, we reject the design of what God has. We're saying, I have an excuse why I don't need to be this deeply connected. And the prayer of Jesus was, let them be one as you and I are one. David leaves his family. He leaves his livelihood. He lived in relationship with Saul, or with Jonathan in the house of Saul. You know where else we see this reflected? In the New Testament community. Acts chapter 4, 32 to 35. All of the believers, and when they say all the believers, do you ever read that and go, well, there must be one of them. There must have been that one guy that was not united. But it says all of the believers were united in heart and mind, and they felt that what they owned was not their own. So they shared everything they had. The apostles testified powerfully to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and God's great blessing was upon them all. There were no needy people among them because those who owned land and houses would sell them and bring money to the apostles and give them to those in need. So when you read this text, do you think that's just crazy talk? Do you think, how would we actually live this out in our lives today? Well, we are gonna have conversations about it. But we see it in David's life. We see it in the lives of the new believers. There's something about when you listen to the Spirit of God that it changes the way that you function, and your life no longer has the boundary of what I have is mine and what you have is yours, and let's just hope that it all works out together. I am married to a very wonderful wife that we started dating when we were 15 years old or something like that. She's pretty lucky. She's been with me for 30 years. Now I'm sleeping on the couch tonight. She serves all day at school, and she's been a teacher since you're 22 years old. Hundreds of kids, hundreds of people. She's now serving as a principal. Work, work, work. People all around her all the time, and she's an introvert. So when she comes home, we even have a little sign in that I made for her, and it's a yellow caution sign, and it says introversion in progress. And whenever she needs a little time where I'm not talking at her, or Hope's not talking, she can put that sign at the front of the living room door and just go, introverting in progress, leave me alone. Over the course, we've been married for 23 years. Over the course of 23 years, just lose it? No, we're back in. We've had 9 people live in our home over the course of 23 years, which for an introvert is not a good idea. But you know why we do it? Because when we first got married, we were blessed to be able to buy a home in our second year of marriage. And ever since then, we've been able to own a home. And it's not been because we've deserved it, it's because God's blessed us with it. And every time we said, this home is too big for us, and this home is to be used for God's purposes. And over the years, we've given the cars to people, given the homes to people, or given the space in that we haven't given away our home. We still need a place to live. Because one of the deep principles that we figured out early on is what we have is not ours, what we have is God's, and we're to live in relationship with people. And for me, actually, I mean, I shouldn't get much credit at it because I'm an extrovert. I love having more people in the house. It's like, oh, there's a party every time I come home. But when Amanda's figured it out, going, no, we need to live in a way where our home is not our home and our home is somebody else's. And you know, I've watched that same thing happen, and I think of, Hope's out serving somewhere else this morning, so I'll throw her under the bus. But Paul and Nancy, you guys opening your home to care for Hope when she needs a space just to come and have dinner and love and care. Thank you for being an awesome space for our child. I love when this example is lived out, when we go, what God gave us, we're going to invite other people into so that we can be a blessing to other people. Our Western society says you are only responsible for yourself. The Bible says you are responsible for the people of God. And if it costs you comfort, if it costs you money, if it costs you that you would sell your land to care for other people, this is what we see modeled through Scripture. And again, we have to ask, are we okay when it's uncomfortable for us, but Scripture tells us to do something differently, that we might lean into that? Now, we're not asking you to sell your home and bring it to the church and we'll distribute that. We're not asking for that. We are asking, reflect on the principle. Would you do something different even if it made you a little uncomfortable? Contextualize the verse for yourself. And this requires a level of vulnerability, of putting yourself and your well-being and your comfort in the trust of other people who may not make you as comfortable and may let you down. But these are what committed relationships look like, which is our last thought, that deep relationships, they actually thrive on commitment. The relationships that we're talking about, they have to have equal investments. They have to have equal expectations of each other. Because when there's an imbalance, when we're making commitments to each other, well, it leads to hurt. If you're saying, well, I'm committing this and I'm not ready to commit that same thing back, that can be a challenge when somebody expects one thing and you don't receive the expectation. So when we're gonna make these kinds of formal commitments, or when we're gonna have these kinds of relationships, we wanna have clear expectations. Articulated expectations will make it successful. And this is what David and Jonathan did. 1 Samuel 18, 3 and 4. So Jonathan made a solemn pact with David because he loved him as he loved himself. And Jonathan sealed the pact by taking off his robe and giving it to David together with his tunic and his sword and his bow and his belt. And as you read the book of Samuel, I want you to look for examples of this pact impacting the way that they live their lives. And when you see Saul, Jonathan's father, try to go after David's life, watch how Saul risks his allegiance to his father to care for the friend that he made this pact with. When you read about how David becomes king, and what would have been normal for the king when he came over is, let's make sure there are none of Saul's descendants able to step into the throne. You know what David does? You'll read about it if you're reading 1 Samuel. David goes and says, are there any of Jonathan's descendants so that I can go and honor them because I made this pact with this one that I was so deeply connected with? And over the course of their lives, they live this out where they say, it doesn't matter what it costs me. It doesn't matter if it threatens my kingship. It doesn't matter if it threatens the trust with my father. They knit their lives together deeply because God created them for that kind of relationship. So here's the question, and Jesse's gonna walk us through this in a moment here. Do you have people in your life that you're willing to be that vulnerable with? That you're willing to be that committed with? That you're willing to journey with, even if it costs you, even if it inconveniences you, even if it challenges you? Over the course of this series, we're not only gonna focus on what the teaching is, but how David bonded his life with other people. We're gonna ask you to consider, are you willing to make a mind shift? Are you maybe willing to make a habit shift? Maybe in the way that we meet as a church, would you be willing to make a shift? And I'm setting you up on this one, Jesse. So that God, and here's the reason why. Would you put yourself in an uncomfortable space so that God could potentially do something different in you. What's the definition of insanity? Okay. I think we all got it out there. Doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. If you're in a place where you say, I actually don't have anyone that I'm that deeply committed to. I don't have any of those connections. I don't have anyone, a space where I would invite someone into my home or where I would risk this, this, and this. And we do the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. Will we ever develop that relationship?